I'm Angela Love-Zaranka with LER, here to present to you today Real Talk, the realities of being and becoming an IBCLC.
Hello, and I'm Sekeita Lewis-Johnson, also sitting alongside the lovely Angela, and I'm here to discuss real talk with her and you.
So a little bit about us. I have been a board certified lactation consultant for many, many years. I have also worked in community support. That was my origin. I have worked in a hospital setting for many years, working with Baby Friendly, getting our hospital through Baby Friendly. I've also had very active private practice, and I've been fortunate enough to serve on a few different boards of directors in order to guide and advise on the profession as a whole. How about you, Sekeita?
Yeah, thanks for asking, Angela. So I actually I came into this field as a maternal child nurse. So I've had a ton of hospital experience as a nurse as well as a lactation consultant. I also have my own private practice. I also have sat on boards, national boards as well. And I've also had the opportunity to teach nursing students and precept oncoming lactation consultants. And so bring you experience from all the different hats that I've had the opportunity and privilege to wear in this space.
Exactly. So we're both very lucky and have been asked a lot of questions, and we are here to provide you with some answers and help you along with your journey and your dream. So before we get started, just want to point out a couple of things regarding the interface. If you're participating today on a desktop, take a look at where this blue arrow is pointing. That is where you can ask questions. You can also type comments in, and that way we'll see it. So please do, if you'd like, go ahead and practice. Tap on the question box and enter the location where you are participating from today. If you are listening to us on a mobile device, you can take a look at that green question box, and that green, not the question box, but the green arrow is pointing to the question box. So you can click on that and you can enter where you are participating from today. So please do ask us any questions that you would like. Joining our webinar today, we have, I believe we have Wendy. I believe I heard her voice just a few minutes ago. Wendy is part of our amazing customer support team. She has been working with LER for over 10 years, and she is very much aware of the process of being and becoming an IBCLC. And so she's going to answer some of your questions, which are in the chat, and she's going to flag a couple for Sekeita and I to answer live at the end of the webinar. Also monitoring the questions and providing tech support is Jill. She can provide you with any sort of support that you need. So if there's any tech issues that you have, please do flag her and she will respond. So let's go ahead and get started and take a closer look at what a lactation consultant is and how you can follow your passion and become one. Now, if you decide to become an IBCLC, you'll join more than 35,000 IBCLCs in over 131 countries and territories around the world. Credentialing as a lactation consultant is offered by the International Board of Lactation Consultant Examiners Commission, or I'm sorry, the International Board Certified Lactation Consultant Commission. A lot of words there. Take a look at their website, ibclc-commission.org. They have different regional offices depending where in the world you reside or work. Review the requirements and pathways to become eligible to take the IBCLC certification exam. What do you need to know? Well, there's something called the Detailed Content Outline, also known as the exam blueprint. It's based on surveys of IBCLCs in various practice settings around the globe. The outline covers all of the topic areas and the chronological stages an IBCLC needs to know in their work. Our courses cover the entire detailed content outline, and they're also approved by LARC. That's the Lactation Education Accreditation and Approval Review Committee, LARC. They evaluate and approve lactation consultants training courses. Now, Sekeita is going to review a few questions to ask yourself today as you listen in. Sekeita, go ahead.
Thanks, Angela. So before we begin and before we dive in, because we're going to dive into a lot of information, a lot of helpful information, I hope, that will help you and assist you along your journey. But these questions, it might be helpful to write down. So as we dive in and we start to talk about some of the skills that are necessary, the first question you want to ask yourself is, do I have the skills necessary to become an IBCLC? And we're going to talk about that, like I said. However, some of you might say, wait a minute, I don't know about that skill. Do I have the skills that Sekeita is talking about? And if you don't, then ask yourself, where can you get these skills? After today, it's going to be helpful if you can process these questions so you can develop your plan, your own individualized plan of how to get the skills that is going to be necessary for your success. And hopefully today, we're going to help you make sense of it. So don't try to worry though if it does not make sense today, because we're going to give you a lot of information. Sometimes people need to hear this a couple of times, so this will be recorded and you will be able to access it at a later date to go back and kind of refresh your memory on some of the things that we've talked about. So what makes an IBCLC? What makes an IBCLC? I don't know about you, but in any situation that I walk into, particularly clinical, but anything, even if I walk into a restaurant, a nice restaurant to eat, I hope they would be competent on the menu, right? But competency is critical, particularly when you're dealing with clinical situations. And I'm going to go out on a limb and say, you wouldn't want, for example, a neurosurgeon, someone who operates on the brain, to do surgery on your heart if you had a heart condition, right? Because that neurosurgeon would lack the competency to do the heart surgery. So competency means you have the ability, the knowledge, the skills, the attitude to complete a task and to do it successfully. And in any new profession, there's a growth track, right? So when we talk about competency, we're not talking about, yeah, you finish your education and you are an expert. No, when you finish your track and your plan and your pathway, you're considered a novice. But the more you practice, the more you professionally develop, you eventually turn into that expert, right? So novice means that you have the foundational knowledge and some skills, but you do not have that, okay, I've seen this before, I've been there, done that, this is what you do. So, it's important that by the end of your training, that you are confident that you have the foundational knowledge and the skill set so that you can decrease during risk. I'm sorry, you can decrease your risk in doing harm to families. And that's what this is all about. That's why we want competent clinicians to minimize harm, to prevent harm if we can at all costs. Another skill set that we talk about is delivering culturally appropriate and credible care. So when we talk about culturally appropriate care, what does that mean? If you worked in healthcare or been around anyone who worked in healthcare, you might have even heard the term culturally competent. Culturally appropriate is another word and can kind of be more fitting for where we want to be and how we want to provide our care, because it starts with cultural humility. And cultural humility is truly a lifelong process of self-reflection. So you know how I had you start with the self-reflection questions? Cultural humility is kind of something similar to that. It is a self-reflection and self-critique whereby we learn about our own selves, our own cultures, and we start with our own sets of beliefs and cultural identities before we even begin to start to unpack and learn about other people's cultures. So it's really a lifelong process. It's a lifelong process of relearning what we've previously been taught about other cultures and other people. And I'll give you an example when I say relearning, what that means. I've been in clinical situations, and this has happened more than once, where I've heard a colleague say something like, well, it's not in their culture to do X, Y, and Z. And in all honesty, that is not a culturally appropriate statement. And these are the types of statements that should be avoided. And that's the first part of cultural humility, is not feeding into stereotypes and not making assumptions about what someone will or won't do based on their culture, because you really don't know what they will or won't do unless you've been told by that person what their particular preferences are. So I want to just say that that's a huge part of delivering care. And it also goes into credibility too, a little bit. Credibility is a different skill set, but it's also so important to what we do. And I want you to ask yourself today, do you believe that you would be a credible resource? In essence, do you know where to get information, basically? But let's see, when you're asked a question, so let's just say you're asked a question and it might not be something that you're very familiar with. How do you respond to that question? Are you a person that automatically tries to respond off of your own whim? Or do you talk about or think about your lived experience centered around that question? Or do you refer to what the evidence says about that, right? I'm asking you that question because whenever we talk about breastfeeding or chest feeding, someone always wants to tell their story. They're always in the room or around saying, oh, it didn't hurt me, or it really hurt really bad, or all you have to do is. And in all essence, our experience, our personal experiences and our journeys really is not or may not be the best answer or solution or the best information to relay in a clinical situation, right? You can always reflect on your personal experience, but it's important that you stay away from that, right? It's important that you become a credible resource, which means that you are giving out information that A, coincides with the best evidence, and B, you really know what you're talking about, right? So the question then becomes, do you know what the evidence says? And if you don't, do you know where to find it, right? We are not all walking dictionaries or walking computers, and it's impossible to know everything, particularly because I just said, when you finish, you will be a novice person. You'll have foundational knowledge, right? So demonstrating credibility is about being forthcoming. It's about saying, you know what, I'm not quite so sure about that. Let me get back to you. Check your credible resources and get back to the client or patient in a timely manner. And the reason this is important is credibility is everything. If you lose credibility as a lactation supporter or a lactation consultant, it can translate to other consultants losing credibility. And I'm going to say real quickly, I've seen and heard a lot of things of what some consultants have said, and I'm like, oh, like it sounds like they're scratching the chalkboard as I'm hearing some of this information. And so you want to make sure you don't fall into that trap, because I can see why sometimes there could be parents who say, well, this person said this and this person said that. Could it be that one person was operating in a non-credible space, but could it be that the other consultant was operating from the evidence, right? So you can see how that could easily be frustrating for families as well. We're going to move on and talk about policies and advising on policies and becoming an advocate. So, IBCLCs, which are International Board Lactation Consultants, board certified lactation consultants, we advise on policies and we help create policies, right? Remember when I talked about having the skills necessary, there may be some of us on this call that already have policy as a strong suit, meaning you already have taken policy courses. You might even be involved. Your job might even entail policy, right? And if you're one of those people, I'm like, okay, yeah, we need you, right? This skill set is important. Why? Because language and policies matter. Poorly written policies can end up with unintended negative consequences that harm the public, simply put. So if you are a policy person and that's your thing, you already have that piece of it. However, if you're not, I want you to know that being a stakeholder is another form of policy work. And what that means is that you are at the table whenever there are lactation specific or related policies that are being discussed. So maybe it's not your strong suit, but as an IBCLC, you want to be there. You don't want to shy away from it. You want to be there to know how policies are created and to know how they impact us, because then that informs your advocacy. And advocacy is a big part of what we do and who we are. An advocate is simply a person who publicly supports or recommends a particular cause or policy. So even if you're not a policy advisor, so to speak, you can be that person at the table listening to how policies are created and sharing your lived experience and your perspective. Moving on to problem solver, and I obviously can't speak today. Problem solver and researcher, right? Problem solving is about 90% of what we do for families, because each family comes with their own set of concerns. And really, when we're called for support, it's usually in request to some type of problem or issue that a family might be having with breastfeeding or chest feeding or lactation or pumping or something like that. So be mindful about framing lactation concerns from this one size fits all. You must know, and you have to ingrain it within yourself, that even as you're learning, that one size never fits all. So we should really be thinking about all of our problems from the lens of the individual, particularly what they're sharing with you, their concerns, their fears, their barriers even, right? Along with being a problem solver, remember I said that sometimes you have to go back and say, I don't really know this. And then you have to look it up. Well, that's being a researcher, right? There are two ways to be a researcher. You can be a person who carries out academic research or scientific research, or you can be the person whose job involves discovering or verifying information, and that's all of us. So let's remember what I said about we don't have it all in our heads. And plus, let's also know, be informed enough to know that there's still a lot of research that's out there that needs to be done in the lactation field and the lactation landscape. So, but understand that we must have valid and reliable tools that inform our practice. High-level skilled lactation care. And I jumble up all these words because, like I said, whenever you see the two words together, they usually go hand in hand in some kind of way. But when I talk about high-level care, I'm really talking and I'm referencing Rebecca Mano's lactation acuity framework, right? There's 3 levels in the framework, but basic breastfeeding care, which is level 1, is assisting with latch and positioning when the infant and parent are both well, and there's no factors for premature weaning other than I just really need a little bit of assistance. Versus level 3, which is the highest level in this framework, looks very, very, very different. So what I'm going to do is have you imagine someone that's in the intensive care unit, a person who just delivered a baby, and they were lactating prior to going into the intensive care unit, but now they're intubated, they're on life support. Are you able to deliver the type of care that is needed for this individual? Are you able to look at the medications and say, okay, what am I looking at? Is this safe? What could be the contraindications for providing safe, for this being safe for the baby, right? Are there any contraindications? Because a lot of times there is not many, but we tend to think they are. Or does this person have a brain injury? And how might that impact lactation? Are you able to look at this level, and are you able to make the connections of all the things that you need to look up or you need to be aware of in order to form any type of recommendations or infant care feeding plan, right? Or lactation plan there is. So when you're doing your training and you're wondering like, why do I need to learn about the cranial nerves, or why do I need to learn about this, or why do I need to know? You need to know about the brain, because that is the level of care that sets the IBCLCs apart. It's being able to handle these complex clinical cases with sound clinical decision-making and recommendations that are appropriate for higher acuity levels of care. So when we talk about acuity, what I'm saying is actually the level of care that's needed for optimal outcomes, the best outcomes. So you want to match those up. And we do that in the hospital. So for example, when I just talked about somebody in the ICU, right? ICU, their level of care is a little different than somebody that's on a general medical surgical floor. So you want to think to yourself, like, do I have those skills? And I'm going to tell you right now, that level 3, I just gave you a really worst case scenario. However, that was a true scenario because that was actually one of my clients. So I just want to let you know I'm not making stuff up. These things do happen. The expectation is that you're not going into the clinical experience thinking that, you've seen it all and you just got to do the status quo. All I got to do is have this person tell them, okay, this person needs to 8 or more in 24 need to pump. No, it's a little bit more than that. That's what I'm trying to say. So once you build your skills, what I'm trying to tell you is to continue to build your skills. Know that when you get your knowledge set, know that you will be challenged to continue to further. As much as you get these complex cases, you want to use those to build your skills and continue to build your knowledge set and your toolkit for how to manage these complex cases. That's all, because that again is what sets the IBCLC apart. Know that in this field, we are essential, and it's important that we are timely. One of the things that we found out during the COVID-19 pandemic was essential was like a buzzword. And we did find out that yes, lactation consultants are essential because babies were still being born and families still needed support. People were still having children. And particularly in a pandemic, promoting and protecting the ability to provide human milk is critically important. And we're not talking about just from the bonding standpoint, we're talking about from a public health and prevention standpoint. So we are essential, and it's important that we show up when families need us, that we are timely, that we can't just tell people, you know what, nope, we're in a pandemic now, or we're in an emergency crisis. We don't know when it's going to be over. You're on your own. No, we're frontline workers. And so I just want to make that clear because we talk a lot about telehealth, and telehealth is great, and it does have its space in the lactation world. I'm going to tell you, though, it's not the end all to be all, and we can miss some things. Telehealth can prohibit our ability to use our other senses sometimes. And so I want to make it clear that there are some instances where, yes, it is appropriate. In other instances, it wasn't. And I can recall a case during the pandemic where there was a baby that hadn't been seen by a pediatrician, and the baby was about 1 week. When I say that, I mean about 7 days of life. And the parent had been calling for support and calling for support. And she said she wanted in-home, she needed in-home support because all of the telephone support that she had been getting just wasn't helping her. And it turned out that the baby could not effectively feed from the breast because the baby couldn't effectively feed from a bottle. There were some tone issues that the baby was having. So me as the advocate now, because now I'm like, I gotta switch gears because this baby needs to be seen, right? I was able to make contact with the provider and let them know what I was noticing and let them know that this baby needs to be seen as soon as possible. Then I had to teach other methods of feeding until the baby could be seen by the pediatrician, right? So what it means is that we're timely, we are essential, and it's our prudent duty to show up so that we minimize harms caused to families, that we are accessible, because that's what becoming an IBCLC is all about, able to provide accessible care at the time that it is most needed. When we're able to do that, we become their collective care partner and we become trusted. And I love the phrase collective care partner because it assumes that we're collaborating. It is the assumption that we are not the center, we are not the decision maker, we are simply collaborating with our patient, with our client to do what is best. We always have to keep at the forefront of our minds that is their goals, again, their fears and their barriers that takes precedence over our goals for them. So one of the first things that we learn when we start to learn on this journey, we start to learn about exclusive breastfeeding, the recommendations for exclusive human milk diet for the first 6 months of life. And while we know that all those things are important, and it's important that we still honor those, right? And we still talk about them. However, we must understand that we are in collaboration and agreement. And when someone seeks our care, that we approach it in that manner, that we don't overstep boundaries that are not meant for us to overstep. And truly, that's how you become trusted. That's how you become trusted to do no harm, to be reliable, trusted to say, I see you as a person. We're in this together. I'm not higher than you. I'm collaborating to do what is best for you. And that's how you become trusted. On the flip side, when you go into clinical situations and relationships and you're hurried, and you're rushing, and you assume a hierarchy-like position, and you assume, yep, I'm an expert, I've been teaching this breastfeeding, I've been teaching all of this for 15 to 20 years, and this is how it works, you're going to lose trust, no doubt. When you go in and touch someone without their permission, let's say they wanted assistance with latch and position, and they didn't tell you the type of assistance they needed, you just assumed that they wanted you to touch their bodies and their babies. That's how you lose trust, right? So you want to make sure that you walk in and you assume a collaborative approach with your clients and your patients so that they feel safe in your care and that they trust you and that they're going to really accept the recommendations that you're giving them as reliable and valid to their situation, to their concerns. So, what did I just talk about in a nutshell? I just talked all about person-centered care or patient-centered care. You will hear it either way. And this is another word that oftentimes become a buzzword in the healthcare space, right? But let me just read the definition for you so that you understand how important and how critical this is, because I just talked about collaboration, I talked about care, I talked about communication, I've talked about culture, I've talked about all of those things, right? But what does it mean? It's providing care that is respectful and responsive to individual patient preferences, needs, and values, and ensuring that the patient values guide all clinical decisions. So with that in mind, really practice this model, practice what it looks like, and remember that you can build trust. And you won't only build trust with your client, you'll build trust within your community and even with other clinicians that work around you. So I'm getting ready to hand this back over to Angela, but I'm going to end with a few questions because I think it's so important to be reflective on any journey that you take in life, not just the IBCLC journey. But before we move on, you want to ask yourself, because Angela is about to talk about the pathways, it's important to listen to each pathway before you start thinking about which pathway belongs to you, right? Or start asking questions about it. So what pathway am I going to? What's best for me in my situation, right? Think about the local market where you are. Think about like, hey, am I planning to do a private practice? Am I planning to work for a pediatrician's office? Am I planning to work for a hospital? What does that look like? What's the market like where you are? Think about how the training might fit into your lifestyle. Have you discussed with your family how many clinical hours this might take? Like all of these things become so important as you think about your journey and the next steps to taking this pathway to becoming an IBCLC. So now I'll turn it over to Angela and she'll get into the nitty gritty of what you really came here for. So anyways, Angela, take it away.
Thanks so much, Sekeita. And these questions are phenomenal as you do consider what you would like to do and where you would like to go with the credential. And so I'm going to break down for you the different things, the different components that you need in order to attain your dream. So it can feel a little bit complicated. We're going to talk about all 4 of these things. I've been answering some questions in the chat, really great questions, which is fun. But these are the things that we're going to talk about next. So the first thing is the pathway. You're going to choose a pathway, and that has relevance in just a minute. I'll come back to this in just a minute. Now, each individual pathway has 3 components. The first one is education. The second one is clinical hours. And the third one is exam prep or getting ready for the exam. Okay, first, health sciences education. It's the typical education healthcare providers have during their when they're in college. So there are 8 post-secondary or university level courses and 6 general education subjects. You can find a full list for each of the 14 subjects on the IBCLC Commission website. You can search for it online or find the link in the resource document in the GoToWebinar interface. Now, the 8 university level courses, and you don't need to write these down, but they are biology, anatomy, physiology, infant and child growth and development, introduction to clinical research, nutrition, psychology or counseling skills or communication skills, and finally, sociology or cultural sensitivity or cultural anthropology. They can be online or in person as long as the institution is accredited to provide the learning. If you took any of these courses during your college career, they count, even if it was 20 years ago. LER partners with Walden University to provide the basic courses. Walden is online and they've chosen the courses that best fit the Commission's requirements. We are collaborating with Walden to provide our students with deep discounts for the college courses. You can find the link to Walden on our website. Start with, at the top, training options. See that banner? See that listing there? Training options, then click on I want to be an IBCLC. Then click education, and that's where you'll find the link. Now, the 6 general education subjects are medical documentation, medical terminology, occupational safety and security for health professionals, professional ethics for health professionals, universal safety precautions, and infection control, and basic life support. So 5 of the 6 general education courses can be taken through LER. The only one you're going to have to search for is basic life support. Now, in many countries, there is an in-person skills check for this training. I have heard of some organizations providing this training completely online, so it's important to check with your local resources. Now, the guide provides general descriptions for typical courses in this subject area. Please keep in mind that the IBCLC is international. The names used in their document to describe the courses may not exactly fit the description of the course at your accredited educational university. It's okay. You're going to note these broad terms with the understanding that there is no one universal description for what a course in, say, clinical research is going to cover. Now, some will ask, now why are these 14 courses required? The IBCLC is a standalone credential, meaning you do not need another certification, degree, or license to practice as an IBCLC. Once you pass the exam, you will be an allied healthcare professional. The courses will help you to be prepared for your career as well as help you pass the exam. So the second thing you need under education is the lactation-specific education. This is where we've got you covered as well. The education should be comprehensive and cover the entire detailed content outline. The Commission requires at least 90 hours of lactation education, which also includes 5 hours of communication skills. Our 5-hour course is specific to lactation and breastfeeding care to help you in your practice as a lactation consultant. And you also need a 2-hour course on the International Code of Marketing of Breast Milk Substitutes, also known as the WHO code. Our lesson is recently updated and relevant to your work as an IBCLC. So the third piece here are clinical hours. That's that lactation-specific clinical experience. This can include in-person consultations, telephone consultations, or online breastfeeding and lactation care that supports breastfeeding families. It also includes lactation assistance to pregnant and breastfeeding clients and lactation education to families and/or professionals. These hours are to be obtained within the 5 years immediately prior to applying for the exam. How many hours do you need? Well, that depends upon your pathway. Okay, there were a lot of questions about the pathways, so here we go. Now, do be mindful that these clinical hours need to be accrued in the 5 years prior to applying for the exam. So I'm going to give you a quick overview and then we're going to go into detail. So pathway 1 is for healthcare professionals and or those who provide breastfeeding support through an IBCLC recognized breastfeeding support counselor organization. Healthcare professionals, according to IBCLC, are physicians, nurses, midwives, dietitians, physical therapists or physiotherapists, speech language therapists, and others. Breastfeeding support counselors include those accredited people through or those who are accredited through organizations such as LER, La Leche League International, the Australian Breastfeeding Association, and others. Now, pathway 2. Those applicants must complete a comprehensive academic program in human lactation and breastfeeding through an accredited university program. Their education has both the didactic and clinical components, and they require 300 clinically supervised hours working with breastfeeding families. Pathway 3 is a structured mentorship program between an IBCLC and the applicant. The IBCLC, or if there's more than one mentor, all of the IBCLCs must be in good standing with IBCLC. Those who choose this pathway must have their program pre-approved by IBCLC before beginning their clinical hours. Now, while 500 or 1,000 hours seems like a lot, there's a really good reason why. Each candidate needs to have the clinical experience so they can provide competent care as an IBCLC. So just one quick little note about this. For those of you who may have breastfed or chest fed or provided human milk for your baby, the hours you spent nursing or pumping and helping your friends sadly doesn't count towards the 500 hours. So just want to make that note. So now we're going to talk about the pathway 1, and then we're going to talk about pathway 3. So pathway 1 need at least 1,000 clinical hours. For the candidate who's also a healthcare provider, the hours can be done in a hospital, a birth center, clinic, lactation care clinic or practice, or through independent practice as a licensed or registered healthcare professional in a non-healthcare setting. For breastfeeding support counselors from an IBCLC recognized organization like LER, your hours can be earned in person or online. The location and type of support depends upon the criteria provided by the recognized organization. The hours need to be counted on an hour-by-hour basis. Now, 2 important points about these clinical hours. First one is it's important to document the hours as you accrue them. Be detailed in case IBCLC chooses to audit your application to sit the exam. They may want to see your documentation, such as a spreadsheet or some other document where you counted the hours. And the second important point is that the 1,000 hours do not need to be directly supervised. Now, please note that LER, we do have a program for those of you who are not already affiliated with a breastfeeding support organization. Our hours program offers you a way to gather those 1,000 hours in your community. So pathway 3 requires 500 hours of clinical experience. Now, this is best done in a busy practice setting where you can work with many breastfeeding, chest feeding people and those who are providing human milk for their babies each day, such as a hospital or clinic setting. The hours count towards the 500 only when you're actually working with families. Now, the observation hours do not count. And I want to make this important point because, as you all know, clinical experience is graduated. That is, it starts with observation, then doing tasks under supervision, then completing tasks independently with the IBCLC nearby to ask questions and discuss situations. LER has an internship program with many sites around the United States. Reach out to support@lactationtraining.com and we can connect you with our clinical internship director, Amy Black, to determine if we have a site in your area. If not, we can give you suggestions on how you can work with your local hospital to facilitate an internship site. Now, there's one thing that Amy wanted me to mention today is that you can't start to count your hours towards that internship requirement until both you and the IBCLC are comfortable with you working independently. Now, many interns, Amy says on average, will spend about 75 hours in orientation before you can begin to accrue the 500 hours. Another way to find a mentor is to take a look in your community to see if there's someone who is willing to be your mentor, or if there's an internship site in your community. Now, you may need to reach out to several people to find someone who has the time, the experience, and the capacity to agree to be your mentor. It's important to find that good fit. Talk to others online who have been through, or in person, who've been through Pathway 3, and see if they also have successful strategies with finding a good mentor. Now, a lot of people, and there was someone in the chat, are asking whether or not they can accrue clinical hours via telehealth during the pandemic. And I checked this just a few weeks ago, and that quick answer is yes. The longer answer is paraphrased from IBCLC documents. They will allow the use of technology if certain parameters are met. So I would suggest that you pay attention to the privacy rules in your jurisdiction, the Code of Professional Conduct, the clinical competencies for IBCLCs, and do check the IBLCE or the IBCLC Commission's website in order to get the latest information about this. So here we go. We're going to go with lactation-specific education. And there are two ways to gather those hours. One is our lactation consultant training program, which is the full 95 hours front to back. The other is either our core or bridge course. They're designed to meet your education needs depending on your background and your previous lactation training. So first, our comprehensive course lactation consultant training program. We call it LCTP for short. It's a 90+ hour course, which is eligible for nursing contact hours and CME. It's intended for those who don't have any lactation education and they know they want to be an IBCLC. We have more than 35 of the most knowledgeable, experienced instructors who are practicing lactation consultants, researchers, and authors who teach in our courses, including me and Sekeita. Our classes are economical. You can view them on a variety of devices, such as your computer, a tablet, or phone. Now, they are optimized for a computer, but once you get through the content, you can review them later when you're on the go. We've been educating people online and in person since 1990. We update our course information with the latest peer-reviewed evidence on a regular schedule, but we do update sooner as new evidence emerges. Have a question for the instructor? You can send an email to our support forum, and we have IBCLCs available to answer your questions or connect you with the instructor. Now, upon completion of the 95-hour course, you're eligible to take our Certified Breastfeeding Specialist exam. The exam is included in the price. Once you pass, you are a Certified Breastfeeding Specialist. This is to recognize you for the level of education you have attained. With this certification, you can begin to collect your clinical hours towards the IBCLC exam. Now, if you're not sure where to start, or you already have some lactation-specific education, then we have our core or bridge programs to meet your needs. They both have the same advantages as our LCTP course. Now, our initial course is called Core because it will provide you with the core lactation education you need to understand what it means to begin supporting the normal course of breastfeeding. It's 52+ hours of online education. It covers the basics such as composition of human milk, postpartum recovery, human milk for older infants and toddlers, facilitators and barriers to breastfeeding, medications and breastfeeding, and much more. At the end of the course is a Certified Breastfeeding Specialist exam. Now, the bridge course. This one is ideal for people who have that basic lactation education and they need an extra 45 hours to qualify for the exam. Topics in our bridge course include infant feeding and disasters, human milk banking, breastfeeding the infant with medical challenges, case studies, and clinical skills videos. So if you're not sure where to start, well, I would say if you're new to the profession, you may want to try the core course. You can get your feet wet and see if becoming an IBCLC fits your lifestyle. Now, I know these requirements seem like a lot, but we are here for you. We have got your back every step of the way. If you have questions about the pathways that don't get answered here today, please be sure to reach out to our friendly customer support team. Many of them are IBCLCs and they know the process inside and out. We have 3 ways for you to earn your education, depending on your goals and where you are right now in the process. If you have questions about what would be right for you, again, our customer support team is here to help. Now, if you're not a healthcare professional already working directly with families and babies, getting those hours can feel like a challenge. We have two programs, one for Pathway 1 and one for Pathway 3 students. And when you're ready to take the exam, we have you covered there as well. We offer two versions of our very popular exam prep. Both use LER QBank, which is a comprehensive system including practice exams, photo flashcards, anatomy flashcards, a study schedule, and a lot more. For those who are taking our 95-hour course, you get a discount on the exam prep course. Our 90-hour course, as well as Core and Bridge, are available in Spanish. Capacitación en Lactancia is our website, which provides the same high-quality education found on LER in Spanish. Now, here we believe that access to high-quality lactation education should not be limited to those who live in countries with high incomes. We recognize that in many parts of the world, the relative purchasing power of a local currency may make the cost of lactation education inaccessible. As part of our commitment to increasing access to lactation training worldwide, our pricing is adjusted according to the student's country of residence. In alignment with our commitment to diversity, Lactation Education Resources is proud to announce our Rising Tide Lactation Equity Scholarship Program designed to increase the number of Black and Latinx and Hispanic IBCLCs in the United States. We recognize one of the greatest obstacles to entry into the field is access, specifically demonstrated by financial barriers. LER will remove that barrier for Rising Tide Scholarship awardees. We alternate these scholarships each year. You can find out more information on our website, lactationtraining.com/Rising Tide. Our team is here to help you now and in the future. Our tech support is open 7 days a week. You can get your questions answered about our content by the experts in the field, and we provide you with ongoing support for the next steps in your lactation career. Thank you so much for your time today. Okay, Sekeita, I know the chat was pretty busy before. Any questions that we can answer for folks now?
Yes, well, thankfully, Wendy has had us on lock, but I do have a few questions here.
Great.
So the first question is, for someone already working in WIC or public health, which pathway do you typically recommend and why? I already have a bachelor's in nutrition and a master's.
Wow.
Yeah. So you want to respond to that, Angela? I mean, either one of us.
Yeah, I think it's either one, right? I mean, I love your experience. So I mean, as a WIC peer counselor in the United States, you can earn your hours through Pathway 1. And Sekeita, I want you to mention about, though, how you could have qualified as a healthcare professional to do Pathway 1, but you chose a different path.
Yeah, I did. I chose a different path for the very reasons that I talked about competency. I could have chosen Pathway 1, but I felt it important to practice alongside an IBCLC because I really, really wanted to get those clinical experiences. And when I say, before I say what I'm going to say next, I'm going to say that I had the privilege already of working in a hospital system, which I know that's not a lot of people's experience.
Mm-hmm.
However, we had an outpatient clinic, and I just thought that for me, it was best to have a well-rounded experience because as a nurse, I see babies the first 2 days of life, right?
Mm-hmm.
But a lot of times we know that the problems don't really hit until many days later. And then they're coming back and they have questions or they start to have problems, they want to be seen or need to be seen, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so we had an outpatient clinic. So for me, I felt it important to actually get the clinical hours, something like exactly when I went to nursing school, we had to have so many clinical hours.
Mm-hmm.
And for me, that was extremely important because I felt like a much well-rounded person. I felt more competent. I felt more confident in my ability and my skills to be able to assist families, not just 1 to 2 days after birth, but beyond. And so that was my reasoning for choosing. So I would say it depends on what your prior experience has been outside of just your degrees, right? So have you had other clinical experiences? I don't want to make that assumption that you haven't, right? But think about what your goals are and think about where you want to work and how you want to use your credential. And then think about which pathway aligns with that. That's how I would describe it.
Mm-hmm. And also finding out if there's even a pathway 3 option in your community.
Yeah.
Right. I mean, I know some people who will reach out to many IBCLCs and then they're unable to find someone who's willing to mentor them. And so they will either come through us or they find other options, or they say, you know what, pathway 1 is going to be the best choice for me. So it may also depend on what resources you have in your community, which is why Sekeita was asking those great questions in the beginning.
Yeah. Does working as a breastfeeding peer counselor for WIC count towards hours if our supervisor was an IBCLC?
So being a WIC peer counselor counts, period. If you want to do pathway 3, you would need to get in writing the IBCLC willing to sign off on the paperwork and submit it prior to accruing your clinical hours. So, and then the definition of that IBCLC may be you'll have to see what their comfort level is with the level of supervision that they provide for you.
There's another one, Angela, that asks, would working in a milk bank go towards clinical hours necessary for any pathway? I would say no. You have to be working with families. You have to be able to be providing some level of support to families.
And so
yeah,
I think if you're in intake, I think if you're doing intakes, then yes, it could. I think though, if you're processing milk, then probably not. So it just depends on what your role is at the milk bank. And I know that many milk banks have IBCLCs. So you may want to chat with the folks there at the milk bank in order to find out what's an option.
Great, thank you. Angela, the next question is, when does the application for the Rising Tide Scholarship open?
Keep an eye to our social media, and we usually announce it there. It's usually mid-year, and so, but our social media is probably the best way to be informed about when it's open. And when I say social media, I mean all the social media. We let everybody know when the applications are open.
Yeah.
Sekeita, someone asked a question here further down. What is the best beginner resources for exploring a career as a lactation consultant before committing to formal certification? And you're smiling. How come?
Well, my best beginner resources is going straight to the website to understand what you're getting into. Lately, I've been talking more about being informed about what you're getting into. And the reason why is because what I've recognized is some newer IBCLCs don't really understand their scope of practice and what that means. Don't really understand the standards and the guidelines of when you are becoming an IBCLC. This is what you're signing up. This is what you're signing up for. And so the best resources would be to go and read what the scope of practice are, the standards of care, also, how we could be penalized for operating out of scope of practice. Read all of those things. The other thing I would say is talk to different IBCLCs. They are probably the greatest resource that you don't have to purchase to find out what specific questions you have. So if you don't know IBCLCs, what I would say to that is there are social media groups that you can find information from. But as far as like resources, generally speaking, I sat for the first exam almost 17 years ago. And I can even tell you now, there's differences in now how we recertify. So up until a few years ago, every 10 years you had to retake the test. Well, I did have to retest one time, but that's thankfully won't be your story, right? And so I would say, if you could talk to people, if you could ask IBCLCs some particular questions that you're interested in, And then also that reflective exercise that I gave you about asking yourself what the market looks like, where do you intend to work?
Mm-hmm.
All of those things, like seriously, take some time and think about what your goals are and think about what your why is. Like, why are you becoming an IBCLC? I can tell you initially, I can tell you my why. I can tell you initially, trace it back to I was like, oh, there's a certification for this, like, you know. And so
Right.
I can trace it back to the why and how I was going to be able to use it to improve and connect with my community and help people, right? So you got to think of it like that. As far as like purchasing any resources, there's not one thing I can think of that would help you with this type of, like, before you take the journey. It would be more of talking to people. And when I say that, talk to newer IBCLCs who just are just getting their foot. And when I say that, probably people who've at least been in the game about 3, 4, 5 years, and then
Mm-hmm.
talk to people who've been in the field for a little bit longer than that. And hopefully that'll help to inform you a little bit better on kind of like what would be the rationale, the reason, is the benefit risk ratio. Is it for you right now, or is it something that you need to consider a little bit later? All of those things,
Mm-hmm.
because when you start to think about clinical hours, particularly if you already have a full-time job. So for
Mm-hmm.
me, I can only speak for me. I'll give you an example. I worked every other weekend as because that was my obligation. But then in order to get clinical hours, I had to work on my off weekends to get those because it couldn't be paid. It was
Right.
like, whoa. And so you have to really seriously think about how does this impact your lifestyle right now, getting your clinical hours, because that's a big piece of it.
Well, and
And
Sekeita, you mentioned having to go in on your off weekends.
mhm.
So someone is asking, is there an estimate on how long the 500 clinical hours take?
Well, it depends on if you go at it, if you plot it out, if you plan. And again, that's why I mentioned writing out your stuff, because you can
Mm-hmm.
plan your journey. Like you can think about, oh, I'll be in school this time, but the summer break, this is that. I can get 40 hours a week. Like you can literally be intentional. I will say that when you apply for the exam, those hours do have to be within the last 5 years. And so you do want to be careful with that. You can't get, 500 hours over 10 years. I'm just saying. So you do have to be really mindful of that 500. And that's why it needs to be carefully planned out.
Yep, that's it. So, and it's people will say, "Oh, I'm going to jump in with both feet. I'm going to be able to commit to this." But if you've got family obligations, if you've got other work obligations, and frankly, there's just life.
Yeah.
Life keeps lifing, right, Sekeita? So you want to be sure that you're planning for that as well. And yes, LER does have a program to help. We have clinical sites, internship sites all over the U.S. We currently do not have them outside of the U.S., but we can help you with finding resources. Someone is asking to repeat the way we can identify if we have local mentorships in the area. If you want to know if we have local internships in your community, then reach out to us, support@lactationtraining.com. And then someone else said, best way to work with someone from our program to get started on the best track for them for you personally. Yeah, Wendy popped in the question. Do give us a call if you like. The person is currently an RN but doesn't do any breastfeeding education in their job, and so you could do pathway 1, but you're going to need to find a way to have access to lactating people and babies. And so if indeed you do, you could either use our hours program, or like Sekeita did, she came in on her days off in order to gather those clinical hours under pathway 3. So you could either do pathway 1 or pathway 3. You have choices, and that's why it's important to check in your community and or reach out to us, and we can sort of talk you through it a little bit better.
Yeah. There's one more question. Are there any IBCLC lactation content channels you all recommend for real world stories, exposure, YouTube channels, podcasts? That's interesting. I know that there were some that were trying to start up. I don't know if they're continuing. I particularly haven't actually, yeah, there is a few that, but I can't think of their names right now,
Well,
actually.
And the thing is it depends on the topic that you want, right? Is there topic about becoming an IBCLC? You know, that may be like one session in a podcast or something. You know, we've got blog posts as well. And so check out some of our blogs and you'll see we answer a lot of the questions because we have either been practicing or we are currently practicing. And so we've got some ways to sort of talk about it. And someone else is asking here about clinical hours. Are they paid or unpaid? And that really depends upon the internship site that you're utilizing. So there is no requirement either way. So it really depends upon what you're able to find. I do know of a few paid internships, but they are very rare. They're few and far between, and they have other requirements.
Yeah, there's another question. So as a current RN in L&D and postpartum, does it mean if I choose pathway 1, my regular work day when working with a postpartum lactation patient will count towards my 1,000 hours? So I too was a labor and delivery nurse and sometimes had to float to postpartum. And that was the other challenge for me, is that I wouldn't have been able to use most of my hours. I would have been slow going for me to get my hours, because I recognize as an L&D nurse, most of my time is providing labor support and labor management, right? And not necessarily assisting with lactation. If I don't know about where you work, but after we delivered, we were like on a time clock. After it was like 2 hours, get your patient over there to recover, like that. TikTok, like, right? And sometimes that meant that the first latch was not achieved, you know, and sometimes it meant that it was, right? But you can use some of your hours. There is a calculator on the IBCLC website of how many hours you can use if you're working in particular areas. But in that instance, I was very clear on that is not going to get me the multiple rounded experience that I need to really be able to assist families as an IBCLC. So I hope that helps to answer that question. So you can use some of it, but you can't use all of that shift. You can only use a percentage of your shift.
Exactly. Yep. There you go. So that's really helpful. I think we got them all, Sekeita. This is great. This is great. A lot of great questions. Thank you so much for your engagement, everyone. Thanks for being here today. This was fun, right?
Yes. Yes, we had a lot of questions, but thank you, Wendy, too, and Jill, for your support. And yeah, but great questions. Thank you for joining us. We wish you the most success, whatever pathway you choose on your journey. And hopefully, you know, you can tap into some of the resources that we've also provided to be able to assist you along your way.
Have a great rest of your day, everyone.
All right. Bye-bye.